And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast. I'm Michael Glennon, sitting in for you, Cahill, today. We have the usual suspects, Donal Lenihan, Bernard Jackman, and RTÉ Rugby producer Wes Liddy on the line. I'm a bit disappointed, Wes. I thought you'd be head to toe in green today, or even a plastic bag over your face to indicate you're from Limerick. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable one. No celebrations this year really. I had about 10 shots of gin on my own on Sunday night when I got home after doing the Sunday game. Fell into bed about 3:30 in the morning. That was the extent of my homecoming party. I do wonder how no one in Limerick managed to get Kyle Hayes or Gerard Hegarty playing rugby at any point over their teenage years, but that's probably another story.
Well, but it's official now anyway. Wes, I was only looking 2 All-Irelands in 3 years. You're the kings of Munster in Ireland, and 2 Limerick starters on the Munster Heineken Cup team. So you're officially now a hurling county. Rugby's got out the door. All the big fellas now are playing hurling.
It's a long time coming, in fairness. So, it is funny though. It's definitely certainly obviously a lot of the rural places, hurling was always as big or bigger probably than rugby. But certainly in the city, it's very noticeable the last few years. And it was probably the only catchment area where rugby was the number one sport in Munster. So it is actually a big concern, I think, for Munster in a lot of ways as well. And it's definitely going to be the attractive product for a lot of kids going forward at the minute anyway.
Well, you know me, I've been slagging you for years about the lack of Munster forwards. I mean, again, you go last weekend, with Killer out injured, no Limerick forward in the starting pack or in the bench. That has to be a concern. But anyway, that's for a different podcast. Enjoy the hurling when you have it. Cork are coming. We're coming slowly, but we're coming.
And there was a ruck at the start of the All-Ireland final. There was a big 30-second maul or a ruck or a scrum or something. Right, lads, I don't want Wes to get dragged off into another podcast. We'll keep him here for a little while. On Monday, the Rugby World Cup draw was made just around the corner, lads. This time, 3 years, we'll be all wondering how it all went wrong again. But the draw was made. Ireland again in a tough draw. I'll just go through the pools. So Pool A is New Zealand, France and Italy. Pool C is Wales, Australia and Fiji. Pool D is England, Japan and Australia, plus 2 others to each of those. Pool B is where Ireland are. It's South Africa and Scotland. The hard part is that if Ireland were to finish in the top 2 there, they would most likely face New Zealand or France, who will be the hosts, of course. It's not very easy. Andy Farrell was looking at the draw, and this was his immediate reaction.
Well, there's nothing better than a Rugby World Cup draw to get your rugby juices flowing. I think now players and fans alike know what the journey's like ahead of us, and it's super exciting. Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, you're always going to judge yourself against the best, and at this moment in time, South Africa are number 1 in the world, and rightly so. So that's a great challenge for us. And obviously, the rest of the group is pretty similar, actually, isn't it, to the last World Cup, regarding Scotland being in there. And then, we'll look at how the other draws shape up. But it looks like, the similar type of teams that we've been in the last World Cup we could be coming up against again. Obviously, with the world number 1 South Africans thrown in there, rather than the host Japan in the last World Cup. It's certainly something that gets you thinking about next steps and the journey ahead. Obviously, we get to play Scotland every single year, and the rivalry will continue, which is a great, a strong rivalry. South Africa, it looks like we could get to play them in one of the autumn internationals. Not that nothing's been confirmed yet, but it looks like we might get to play them once before the World Cup, which would be great. But obviously, there's a Lions tour that's shaping up for the summer of next year, and obviously that could be a big opportunity for our boys. Well, there's always different ramifications what happened in a World Cup, so we'll not get too far ahead of ourselves, certainly. Fortunately we get to play against France, and being able to have an opportunity to play against the host is always great, like we found in Japan. Obviously Italy, we get to play against them, so we'll know them pretty well. New Zealand, we'll probably get to play them once, probably in the next couple of autumn series, hopefully, maybe once or twice. But there's a tour in a couple of years' time that takes us to New Zealand, a 3-game tour, which is super exciting, something to build on.
Okay, lads, are you excited, Donald? Just 3 years down the road, I bet you can't wait.
Yeah, it's amazing. It feels in many ways as if we're just back from Japan, just over a year ago now. Look, there's always a bit of excitement. I often wonder, the World Cup draw, is it necessary to have it done so far out? I mean, we're just under 3 years away. The pool seeding as well, you've got to wonder, like Wales were in that top tier in terms of the seeding, whereas they've fallen way down since. But look, it is what it is. I think I've stopped second guessing quarterfinals on the basis of what we've seen over the past number of years. 4 years ago, we thought we had the ideal draw. We'd beaten South Africa home and away in the build-up to the last World Cup. We had Japan in the pool, so we thought, okay, top the pool. South Africa in the quarterfinals, straight to the semi-finals. Obviously, we saw how that worked out. And also, I think, look, as Rassie Erasmus showed, South Africa were a mess 18 months out from the World Cup, yet he managed to turn them around in that short period of time to become World Cup winners. So, look, it's a tough draw. I mean, the potential quarterfinalists, France, as we know, and we'll be talking about the Champions Cup last week, the French clubs, 7 out of 8 wins. They're on the right track. New Zealand, they're always favourites coming into the World Cup, so it's a tough one.
Bernard, your impressions?
Yeah, I agree with Donal. Look, I think obviously the quarterfinals draw on, you're going to either get New Zealand or France if we qualify. Are both very daunting fixtures at the moment. But likewise, Wales will probably have turned it around. They don't look a good side now. Obviously, we're top seed, but there's probably no easy game in the quarterfinals anyway. So I think for Andy Farrell and his coaching staff, it's just a case of trying to find new talent. The World Cup in 2015, when we had some injuries for a quarterfinal, we didn't have the depth. The last World Cup, we were probably very reliant on certain players. So I think he's going to continue to try and just find some new talent who, by the time the World Cup comes around, are viable, starters for us and see where we're at. But things can change so quickly. It's very hard. Like at the moment, you would say France are the best Northern Hemisphere team in terms of the potential in 3 years' time. But it's very hard to predict, where teams would be.
Do you think we have a tendency to trundle in between World Cups and then a year out to start focusing on them, whereas the other countries unashamedly say they have 4-year plans in place? Is that just not possible for Ireland? We never seem to say we are focusing 4 years down the road and we end up in the same place again. Is that not possible for Ireland?
I think it is. It is possible. I think it's very difficult to get the plan right. I mean, in 2019 for Six Nations, Gatland was building towards the World Cup, and he ended up winning a Grand Slam. And which obviously helped him in the World Cup. But I think it's a finite balance. I think the big time to really blood players is usually June tour, summer tour, and sometimes in November. The Six Nations generally doesn't see much rotations. But given our player pool, it's common knowledge South Africa had over 100 or over 1,000 professional players. We don't have that many professional players, so it's probably a case of just trying to keep everyone in form, fit, and have good depth in the special positions, which we haven't really managed before.
Have you booked your ticket yet, Wes?
No, definitely not. I think hopefully anyway we'll be allowed travel by then, but I don't know. It's I don't think we do. I don't think we have done the 4-year plan in a lot of ways, I suppose, because financially it was always stressed how important it was, our finishing position in the Six Nations. So this year that's a little bit different without crowds and stuff, but at the same time you've seen the pressure that's came on Andy Farrell after a couple of results in a meaningless tournament in the autumn. So I think it has been hard for us to like completely throw all our eggs in that World Cup basket, and to be honest, we haven't won that many championships that I think you can be blasé about it. So I do think it's a difficult balance to find, and maybe the Pro 14 expansion will be of some benefit when you're heading into play South Africa. But Yeah, it's a daunting path to a semi-final for sure when you're looking at the team's current trajectory.
The one thing I would say that, Wes, is Andy Farrell in that piece, he mentioned the fact that Ireland now have a 3-test tour to New Zealand. That's only 15 months out for the World Cup. For me, like, that is a key. That's a key moment in terms of, if you're playing 3 tests in New Zealand, he could bring 34, 35 players on that tour. That's the time when you decide to really see who's going to stand up. Where are you? How prepared, say, some of the younger guys that you will hope will have filtered into the team by the time you get to 2022. This is the ultimate test, playing New Zealand in New Zealand. And I think that's the time when you start shaping your World Cup squad. And you really will see how guys will stand up in the white heat of battle in New Zealand. Always difficult to tour down there. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I mean, you look at England, and I know it was actually 3 or 4 months before the World Cup in 2003. They went down and played New Zealand and Australia that particular summer, beat both of them. They probably peaked in that period. They weren't at their peak when they won the World Cup, but that was a massive moment for them in terms of winning. Ireland have the opportunity of doing that 15 months out. So I think that will give you a great barometer as to who is good enough at that point in time. And you can build then from there 15 months out.
And just finally, and I know Liam Tolan was making a point about the more caps that Johnny Sexton gets now, it's a cap away from a potential out half in the World Cup. Now, I'm not going to retire Johnny Sexton. I guess it's up to the players coming up, the other out halves, to put the pressure on him. But does Andy Farrell have a responsibility to look down the line and say, if Johnny gets picked in every big game that he's fit for now over the next couple of years, I may go to France in 2023 with an out half who has 10 less caps, 20 less caps than he should have, or then that what will be necessary to pull off a semi-final.
Yeah, I think there's going to have to be games over the next 2 or 3 years where we do know who the backup 10 is for sure, but it's a fine balance because winning and winning across the whole squad is hugely important. So you can't afford to throw games. Look, I think it's going to happen naturally, and even in this autumn cup, Johnny not going to playing against England was an opportunity for someone else, and obviously the way the performance went, it probably was an opportunity taken. But I think there will be little gaps and windows for other guys to step in, and maybe not on a rotational basis, maybe just due to a knock. We saw he had a dead leg at the weekend against Montpellier. Top end Champions Cup games are a good place to judge them as well. So it's not just in an Irish jersey. I think it's the big games in Europe where you can find out a lot about those players, and I think there's plenty of time to see over the next 3 years who is going to step in if anything happens to Sexton.
Okay, because
sorry, Mike. I also think it's a massive expectation to think that a 38-year-old is going to be still able to play at that level at a World Cup. I mean, I know Johnny has spoken about this, and that's his goal and his target. He's driven. We know that. But I mean, as you get older, I mean, you'll be amazed in a short 4 or 5 month period just how things change. And like Johnny could be flying up to 6 months, 9 months out from a World Cup in 2022 or early 23, and yet the wheels can come off. So I think Farrell is duty bound to not only know who his number 2 is, but to know who the number 3 is, and to give them a lot of game time in that period. If he doesn't, I think it could be an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, because just before the last World Cup, I remember I was looking at the backup. Joey Carberry went, but Joey Carberry had actually never started a Six Nations match, for example. I mean, would we be on the same route to repeating the same mistakes?
It could, it possibly could. But as Bert said, I think we're at a bit of a threshold at the moment now, in that there are a lot of good young 10s coming through. We saw the impact Ben Healy had again when he came on. He's a very good temperament. Unfortunately, I know we'll probably be talking about Champions Cup again, but look, he shipped 2 knocks, and I understand he's out for the weekend now. Harry Byrne made his debut for Leinster away. So I think a lot is going to happen between now and then. It's an awful pity things like the A internationals that were there long ago. It was a great breeding point for players like that. You can't do it now, obviously, with Pro 14 running parallel to Six Nations and that. But look, I think we're going to see a lot of change in that whole area over the next 2 years.
Do you think, Donal, that or Bernard, that you'd mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, that maybe a kind of a loan system to some clubs in England or France is something worth looking at? Is if there's only so many jerseys in the provincial system here, and there is an abundance of good 10s at the minute, is that an option? Maybe that's something that could be utilised over the next couple of years for some of the more talented youngsters. And I suppose on the back of that, how prudent is it to give a now 35-year-old, 36-year-old what length of contract when January rolls around? Should it be year to year at this point for someone of that age, or obviously he's going to want more security that he thinks he can play till the next World Cup? How do the IRFU navigate that?
Yeah, I think for the first one on loans, I think looking at France and how they've I suppose turned a corner a little bit. A lot of those young talent that you're seeing now play in a French jersey, but also in those Champions Cup sides who are starting to get results, have spent time in Pro D2. So Thomas Ramos, the Toulouse out half, he hasn't broken through as a same level as Intermac for France, but is a quality player and will get lots of caps. He spent a year in Colombia playing fullback for them week in, week out, kicking goals, just getting experience. And that's been a big shift in France over the last 2 or 3 years. They're sending those players out to top or Pro D2 clubs where they have to play. If they don't play, they take them back on loan. And it's accelerated their development to a massive extent. And probably here with the pandemic and probably a lack of this A competition, but I probably even think even if the A competition was still viable, the provincial A competition rather than the international A, I do think that was a great opportunity to have a look at people. The games weren't competitive. I mean, if you go to Colombia and play in Pro D2 and they're fighting to get promoted to top 14 or they're fighting to stay up in Pro D2, it's kind of like the cup rugby that Munster were built on. They're important games and you get to be tested in it, where sometimes I feel those A games that we see, it's a run out, it's 80 minutes, it's game time, but those guys thrown together, they're all very young and there's nothing really at stake. So I don't think it's the best environment, and I would be certainly in favour of young players with talent in Ireland getting little blocks in the Premiership in England or in France, if they could, and I think it would be a way of bringing through our players. Certain players who are blocked by internationals where it's not likely they're not going to play for 2 or 3 months, bring them through a little bit faster.
Yeah, it's happened before. I'd be all for it on that loan basis. I think off the top of my head, Bert, you might correct. I think John Ryan, as a young tight head or loose head at the time, went off to London Irish, played there for 6 months, came back. South Africa have done it here. We've seen a lot of their props. Dutoit came up here, played with Munster for a while, went back to South Africa. So I think we have such a limited pool of players. We have to expose those young players to as much good quality competition as possible. So I'd be all for that as long as you retain control of where they are. So why not?
Just wanted to touch on England's group because, as I mentioned before, England have Japan and Argentina and a team from Oceania and a team from Americas. And Eddie Jones has been doing some consultancy work for 20 years, it says here, with the Sun Goliaths. And the IRFU say that there's no conflict of interest. I'm just wondering what the equivalent is for Ireland. If Andy Farrell was doing some work advising the Warriors or advising Edinburgh, would that be allowed to happen? Or do you see, I mean, it looks like a conflict of interest to me. What do you guys reckon?
He's been doing it for a long time, and they see it as a way of keeping him happy. Given the individual he is, apparently the weeks he is away, his communication with his other coaches and across all stakeholders in the English game increases. He's a workaholic. He's on top of everything. So I think they're happy for him to do that. It's more a case of having him in camp, fully content and happy, and probably because he's someone who's always done it. There's going to be no effect on on his performance. He did it going into the last World Cup, and obviously, they got to World Cup final. They just won a Six Nations. They won an Autumn Cup. So I think it's very different than a situation like someone like Andy Farrell, who's in his first head coach job. And he's learning the ropes, and there's a job of work to do here, where and in fairness, it's because it's such a different type of job. The season's very short over there. He knows everyone in the club. It's more around, he helps with recruitment, he helps with the developing coaches. It's not a hands-on coaching job. So I just think it's very unique to Eddie, and the only way you could see it happening in the game is if the unions want to cut costs. So if there's a massive issue with post-COVID in terms of salaries, if they said to, Andy Farrell, look, you can go on the Lions tour, but we split the difference with the Lions committee, or you can go to America and do a block of work for 4 weeks, whatever. But I don't think any of the big unions will go down that road.
I think as well, though, you could actually flip it on its head and say, look, this is the best reconnaissance that we can do. Japan are in our pool. I'm out there, whatever, for a period of time every year. I'm watching what they're doing. We had heard prior to the last World Cup that Jamie Joseph had taken all the players out of their Super Rugby sides. They were training behind closed doors. They were playing matches. And look how well prepared they were for the World Cup. So you could argue, by having Eddie Jones out there on a frequent basis, he's looking at the trends, he's looking at the new players that are coming through, and will actually aid him in terms of his preparation for their pool game in the World Cup.
So Eddie Jones, there's no need for him to hide up on top of a bonsai tree if he's in the mix. He's in the middle of them all there. Lads, Europe was back this week. As Donal, you were saying earlier on, the French teams got off to a good start. Apart from Montpellier, I heard an interview with Paul Willems in advance, and he seemed to convince, I believed him. He fooled me. He was talking about this great effort that how serious Montpellier were going to take it this year. And then they went out and they really, after 10 or 20 minutes, they didn't look bothered at all, I'd argue. What did you make of the
weekend? I think I heard the same interview. It was on the 7:30 Sports News there on the Friday morning.
I wouldn't be up that early. It must have been later, Donal.
Yeah, I was listening to Willems, and Jesus, if you remember on last week's podcast, I had said to you how shocking Montpellier were when they played Leinster in the RDS, how disinterested and unfit they looked. So, I mean, I certainly wasn't convinced by Willems, even at 7:30 in the morning. And look, I mean, to be fair to Leinster, you go back, for me, that game, 5 minutes into the game, first scrum of the match, they're Peter Dooley at loose heads, like in the pecking order of international, behind Cian Healy and Ed Byrne. You James Tracy at hooker behind Sean Cronin and Ronan Kelleher, and Michael Bent, has ended up being a fantastic servant for Leinster, but like he's behind Tadhg Furlong and Andrew Porter. They actually shift a much bigger Montpellier pack. They get a penalty, score a try in the corner, was the net result, Van de Fleer. And for me, that was it. The game was over. That's Montpellier. So no, that's not Leinster's fault. And to be fair, and I've said it in the past, Leo Cullen has been brilliant at keeping all those players engaged, giving them their opportunity. So look, it's not Leinster's fault, but Montpellier, when you look at the way the French clubs played, as I mentioned earlier, 8 games, 7 wins, all 4 away teams won, which is very unusual from a French perspective. Look, there's always an exception to every rule. It just happened to be Montpellier, but that wasn't Leinster's fault. Leinster's, most importantly, not alone did they win on a potentially tricky game, given all the players that Leinster had away with Ireland for a 2-month period. I'm quite sure that Lancaster and Cullen agonised over that selection for a long period of time. So, and you'd always have doubts in the back of your mind. I mean, you're convinced you're doing this for a reason. I'm picking him for a reason, but there's always that element of doubt. So coming home on the plane with a bonus point win, I'd say they were absolutely thrilled.
And Ulster started off on Friday night. They almost had to lose. I mean, on another day, you take Cheslin Colby out of the equation, they probably would have beaten them.
Yeah, but he's in the equation, and
He certainly is.
so is Dupont. That's why he signed those players. And no, look at Ulster played quite well. Couple of defensive errors. I think frustratingly for them, and I think seeing what Dan McFarlane said after the game, I think they knew Toulouse weren't at full throttle, and it was a game they should have won. And defensively, their maul was great, the physicality was brilliant, but they just suffered. I suppose two real sucker punch tries. Kobe's first try, came out of nothing really, and then it was an error from Cooney not to stop the ball at the base of the scrum, which led to a phenomenal individual try from Dupont. They were in the battle, they were in the fight up against a very good Toulouse side, but I think Toulouse have more gears in them. I think Toulouse, are pretty happy to have got the away win and know that they weren't at the best. Same as Racing. I spoke to Mike Prendergast during the week, and while they had got a hell of a fright off Connacht, they feel they were quite sloppy and quite lucky to get the win in the end. But to get a win with a bonus point first up isn't too bad.
Wes, did you record the All-Ireland hurling final and watch the Connacht match, or did you do it the other way around?
Yeah, I watched the Connacht match while I was in producing the Sunday game. All right.
Very good. Multi-talented.
I watched it this morning. Actually, kind of had a flick through all of them, but I thought that was an interesting piece in the 42 I saw there about the kind of collision success Connacht had, which is really surprising in some ways, but great to see Ultan Delan playing so well. You always kind of felt since you first saw him play with Ireland off the bench that he certainly has kind of physical qualities that we don't have too much of, and he's kind of been in and out of both setups over the last few weeks. So positive from him, and I'm always pretty impressed with Andy Friend whenever I hear him speak, to be honest. So I think they'd be pretty confident playing Bristol this weekend.
Yeah, and we've a bit of a change of a situation now when we associated the French teams with not taking it seriously before. And now we're hearing from the Northampton coach, Chris Boyd, who immediately after their defeat to Bordeaux indicated that he would send some young guys over to play Leinster this week. So, I mean, what does that say about the competition?
Yeah, I think it's if you're the head of the ERC and you hear that, after the first round, you're going to be pretty frustrated. And particularly a club like Northampton who've won it, and been to a final. And in fairness, they are a well-resourced team. They have some quality players. They're up the top of the salary cap. They have a good coaching staff, and and the run they're on as well. I mean, I think they've lost the last 12. And to send a second string over to Leinster, there's only going to be one result. It's going to be a difficult evening, and I don't think it's going to help them get a win quickly. They're going to learn nothing from it. So I think it's frustrating, but that's probably the nature of this. Like Montpellier now are going to have they had very little interest last weekend. They're going to have zero interest. Yeah. So getting a fast start is absolutely paramount, even more so than before.
I think sorry, I'm going to take up the point here. Yeah. I think it's an absolute disgrace. Teams work so hard to get into Europe. Whatever, Northampton, at least they picked their team for the first match. Gloucester sent their kids to Lyon, and they ended up getting 55 points. And the nature of this, it is only when, we discussed the new format in the podcast last week, but it's only when you see the two pools and they're there side by side and you see the points coming up. We all know bonus points in Europe are huge, but now points differential are going to be more important than ever before because there's going to be a glut of teams at the top. So therefore, when one team sends their seconds out in the first match, it just completely distorts the whole tournament. And there has to be some form of sanction from EPCR against the likes of Northampton going forward. I mean, there was something before, I think, whereby you had to show you had so many injuries that you made so many changes in your squad. But when you're doing that from the outset of the tournament, I mean, what message does it give?
Do you think, Donal, the organisers didn't help themselves on that front with the competition structure they chose in terms of it being so unclear exactly what you have to do to actually attempt to qualify? For example, you look at Munster playing Claremont this week. Munster played Quins last week, Claremont played Bristol, and never the twain shall meet. So it's not like you're even coming up against, you don't know who your opponents aren't playing the same team as you. You're not competing directly against them in a pool of 4. I wonder, does it, because it's so unwieldy, does it almost, if you lose that first game and you're not a viable winner, it pushes you further in that direction than it would have in the past?
Well, I think that's a fair point, and I think, you know, I understand to a degree why some of the English clubs in particular are doing that, because if you recall, they ended up finishing the Gallagher Premiership outright, which, you know, so they played loads of games in August, September. The likes of Exeter had only, I think, a 9-day pre-season. A lot of the clubs who weren't in the top 4 had only 2 or 3 weeks off. So I do understand that, but I just think it makes a mockery of the tournament. Also, you know, when you look at the 2 pools, you know, we know there's a discrepancy in them, and because you had Tier 1 teams and Tier 4 teams in Pool 1. And, you know, when you look at that, like Leinster, you can almost say now in advance, like Leinster will get 5 points against Northampton. They'll get 5 points away to Northampton, and then they'll have Montpellier at home in their last match. So I think they'll bag 20 points. So they're going to have a home quarter final. But you look at the other pool, you know, where you've Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams. Look at the teams on the top of them. Lyon, who had been high up the top 14 last year. Exeter, European double champions. Claremont, Toulouse, Racing, and then Munster and Connacht and Ulster come in on 6th, 7th and 8th. I mean, that's a hell of a pool. It's going to be really difficult to get out of that. And that's where the whole points differential thing will make the difference. But, you know, not as you say, not everybody plays Gloucester. I mean, this thing where you change around, you're not playing the same teams.
That's the weirdest part of it. I think, like, why not just leave, like, if you've Claremont, Munster, Quins, and Bristol. Just leave it at that as the 4, rather than 2 teams playing different opposition.
Well, I thought originally, and you know, when they said there was 24 teams and there was only going to be 3 teams in each pool, well, I thought, geez, that's very straightforward. That's 8 pools. Yeah. Whoever tops the pool comes out, and they're in the quarterfinal. Do you know? So, like, they have made it a lot more complicated than it needed to be. But that said, the only plus I will say is because points differential is huge, teams are going to be playing longer. This thing of, you know, before, when you got your 4-try bonus point, you took everybody off and sort of that was it. Now you've got to keep playing to the end because you've got to try and win by as wide a margin as possible. So as a consequence of that, I think the quality of the rugby, the attacking rugby that was played last week was brilliant. And we were contrasting that with how dull the Nations Cup had been. So purely from a spectacle, I thought it was fantastic. But the structure, it does take a bit of getting used to. And, you know, I agree with Birch. I think we'll see more kind of dead rubber games, which is what they were trying to get away with. I think we'll actually see more of those as the tournament goes on.
As you mentioned there, Munster beat Harlequins on Sunday. Ben Healy came on for the last 20 minutes. He took a couple of late hits. I think there was 1 yellow card out of it. But Johan van Graan said yesterday he's out of the trip to Claremont. He's in the news a bit now with Danny Cipriani leaving Gloucester with immediate effect. Adam Hastings is due to go there next year. And there was stories before. Keaton Tracy had a bit, and somebody else had written about it before, that Glasgow may be interested in Ben Healy, who, as it turns out, is Scottish qualified through family. Donal, do you have any inside line on that? What's the likelihood of that? What's your reading of that situation?
Well, it's, you know, normally when you see these things in the media and contracts are coming up, you think, oh, well, look, here we go again. It was the old thing of, you know, 10 years ago, everybody was going to Toulouse or to Biarritz, and all of a sudden their contract was sorted out. But there is more to it than that. Firstly, he is Scottish qualified. Secondly, obviously Glasgow are aware, and now Adam Hastings is gone, so that wasn't fake news. That's been confirmed now. So there is a genuine connection there. It's not a made-up issue. Now, personally, I think Munster would be off their tree, and Ireland would be off their tree to allow it to happen. But you know, it's a consequence, I suppose, of where we are. We spoke last week about the international players who were out of contract at the end of the season. Look, now that the vaccine is coming on stream, you would like to think that things will get back to normal. So therefore, I think the RFU need to start addressing these issues in terms of tying down, firstly, the international players, but of equal importance, these young guys coming through the system. The most, I suppose, the best thing that has happened Munster Rugby over the course of the lockdown has been the emergence of all this young new talent that we knew was in the system, that we knew there was 8 or 9 of those young lads had been involved in that brilliant Ireland under-20 team of 2019. Now they're starting to come through. The last thing we can afford to do is let them fly the nest. So it's this story, it's not made up. It's not one of these, I'm putting a gun to the head of. There is a genuine interest there from Glasgow for the reasons that we can see. But I think, you know, again, you got a glimpse of Healy, as I said, coming off the bench, shipping those 2 big knocks. That kick he got up, kicked a penalty from 54 metres. He's growing into the role. So no, I think, look, we got to make sure that he's kept at home.
Do you think he could go and not declare for Scotland? I mean, would you think Glasgow would take him, give him some frontline experience, and Ireland could still keep him on the books?
What I heard was, what I heard was he's been promised he'll get capped in June if he goes. So it'd be straight in. They wouldn't want him. Can
you imagine playing for Scotland being that much of a carrot for a kid from Nina, though? I mean, really, like. I mean, I can't imagine that's hugely motivating to him. Seriously.
No, I know, but look at as a young player, this is a chance now. He's gonna have to make his mind up now. What he decides now is going to affect, you know, the rest of his professional career. So it's a huge challenge. I mean, I like hearing rumours about this. I mean, Hastings has been on off with Gloucester. And if you look at what the Scottish regions have done over the last 4 or 5 years, they've invested very heavily in non-Scottish qualified players through that project route. And you see the likes of Van der Merwe, etc. now, Schumann, WP Nell, they've spent their time in residency. They've paid him a premium while they waited to become qualified. I mean, for the SRU, it's a no-brainer. You're getting a guy who's shown he has huge potential, who's qualified to go, you know, from now. So, and that's going to be the challenge for Munster and the RFU is being able to compete. And I don't think he'll have to compete. I'd like to think that, you know, that he potentially stay for less in Ireland, whatever. But he is worth just being Scottish qualified, like being EQP or being GIF in France. It totally changes the market for a player of that potential.
The money, like, we won't get into the mentioning the figures, but like we've all heard figures bandied about, and it's fairly eye-watering for a player at that point in his career. But like, as much as you don't want to lose a homegrown player, I mean, you would imagine if you're Munster and by extension the IRFU, and you're saying, okay, we're not sure of his injury profile, but Joey Carberry is there. He's still probably ultimately you would like him to be the long-term option. JJ Hanrahan was picked ahead of him the weekend. I don't agree with the selection, but he was picked ahead of him. And you've tied Crowley, who some would say is a better prospect or every bit as good a prospect. You can't really be strong-armed into paying way over the odds when you have 3 other young guys like that around him either. So I don't think you can just point the finger at Munster or the IRFU if he does leave for extortionate wages.
No, I wouldn't at all.
It's a strange and Ross Byrne as well. So it's not he's not going to be an automatic definite starter for Ireland for years.
It's a strange one for Scotland. He's not going to be a definite starter for Scotland either. I mean, Finn Russell is what, about 28? So you would expect Russell to be the starting out half. We're talking about Johnny Sexton playing in the next World Cup at 38. Like, you would expect Russell, if he can kind of, depending how he gets on with Gregor Townsend, I suppose, but you'd expect him to be the starting 10. Adam Hastings is there. They just captured Jaco van der Vaalt. So it isn't as if Ben Healy's going to walk into the Scottish team either. In some respects, you would say his opportunities here are greater. My understanding is Joey Carberry won't be playing anytime soon. I think Ben has jumped JJ Hanrahan in the pecking order. Jack Crowley is another player who, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, he played in the A game I saw against Ulster last week, but that was his first game since early September. And you know yourself, when you're at that stage, particularly, when you're at a 10 and you're trying to learn your game management, even if the All-Ireland League was on or something, you'll be playing a match every weekend. So it's a hugely frustrating time for these young players. But the money, and I'm not sure what sort of level of money you're talking about, Wes, but why would Scotland be investing that massive money for somebody who, at best, would probably be their third choice out half?
Yeah,
well, he'd be potentially Glasgow's first choice now. That's the problem. So
yeah,
if he's Glasgow's first choice, like what does a Pro 14 team pay their first choice 10? That's the difference now. Whereas I agree with you. When I heard the figure and I heard that Hastings was going to stay, I was like, wow, that's madness. But now Hastings is gone. Even if he doesn't play for Scotland, if he's not a regular starter for Scotland, if he can be first choice for Glasgow, he's worth that, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, but I'd hate to think, Birch, that you'd lose him to be first choice for Glasgow and not play international rugby.
No, absolutely.
That's bizarre.
But maybe it's a thing of he if the money is huge, maybe it's hard to turn down 2 years at it, improve. You come back, you're still only 23. And
but you're Scottish tied at that stage. You can't play for Ireland then.
Well, that's if he's selected for Scotland, I suppose.
Birch said he's on the team next June.
No,
that's what Johnny's going to be playing till he's 48 anyway, so it's all the one really.
No, but look, it's easy. It's easy to tell a kid when you're trying to sign him, look, you'll get capped, and we've spoken to Greg or whatever. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but the reality is, if you sign him for Glasgow, he probably will get capped over those 2 years. Realistically, he probably will get capped because Finn will be away. I think.
I accept that. Yeah.
Top 14 runs into June next year, so I just think he will get. If he goes to Glasgow, he will get capped, in my opinion.
Yeah, but as I say, like, I don't like to pick up a couple of caps for Scotland. I mean, I'm with Wes on this one.
the first now.
Well, a Nina one. I always tell the story about Donica Ryan long ago when we were interviewing him for the Munster Academy. And this 6'7" fella come in with his dad, and he was, I'd give my right arm, he says, to play for Munster. But then he was playing a bit of hurling, I think, was it Nina or whoever he was playing? Nina Earog. He says, I'd give my right arm, he says, to play for Munster. But Donal, he says, if the Tipperary hurlers need me, I'd have to play for them. So I says, Jesus. At the time, Tip wasn't going great. I says, Donegal, if the Tip hurlers need you, they're in a worse position than we thought they were in. But
I remember reading Moss Keene's book years ago. I always got the feeling that he was just hoping that one of his performances on the Lions tour would get him a call up to the Kerry team.
I think he met someone from Garryowen and someone from Shannon with his dad, because they were both trying to get him to sign for him, and he met them in the same hotel about an hour apart, and Garryowen fella came in and was like, well dressed and very professional, and the Shannon fella wasn't. He maybe came in his work gear or something like that, and I think the fact that your man came in the work gear was what tipped him in the direction of Shannon for a finish. So the story goes.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second.
I don't know. Guys, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today. Donal, you'll be on duty on Saturday for Leinster against Northampton. That's on Radio 1 Extra and Radio 1. And on Sunday, we have Connacht against Bristol. That's Radio 1 Extra and Radio 1 as well. You can follow those games on the RTÉ Rugby website. We'll be blogging them all. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
That is next week.